It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk about the Ali Act. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the antitrust settlement for a few minutes here. But first, John, how the heck are you? Because you know what? I hear you a little bit wheezy.
I'm not. I am terrible. I tested positive for COVID. I'm sick. And I am going to just try to get through this show without losing control of all my bodily functions.
Well, let's get this show on the road then, because we don't want to hold you up on that. We want to get you back in bed so you can get some rest. So, since it didn't get a whole heck of a lot of coverage outside of what we said, what's now going to happen in that Lee v. Zuffa settlement that we had the fairness hearing for that you attended on Thursday?
Well, the judge, if people listen to our show and they listen to our last podcast, they know, they follow us on Twitter, they know the judge approved the settlement. There was no objection, so they approved the settlement. And so we have the settlement is now in place. So the next step is, now normally there's like there's a 30-day process where they get to go over all the objections, but there's no objection. So when the judge has finally officially approved it by putting in his written notice that it's approved, at that moment we are going to start the clock. We'll have 50 or 60 days from there for fighters for the plaintiff's attorneys to contact the fighters with their information for the claim. So that's going to happen next. So if you're listening as a fighter, your key thing you want to do now, because it has been approved, is go to ufcclassaction.com. There's a little button that says get your money. Go in there, give them your information, your name, your Sherdog link to your fights, what class you're in, the Lee v. Zuffa class or the Cajun Johnson v. Zuffa class. You can possibly be in both if you fought in both time periods. Fill all that up, give them their contact information, your email, phone, and stuff, and put it in. That way, when that countdown starts, when they start sending out the claims to the fighters, you'll be one of the guys to get, they'll know how to get a hold of you and send it to you. So that'll be the next step. After that, so the judge approves 50 to 60 days. We have these forms go out. And then after you get your claim, there's a 40-day clock that starts. You have to get that claim back in 45 days. So basically the next 3 months, this is going to happen. You're going to get your claim. You got to submit it, approve the amount that they're giving you, submit it, sign it, send it back. Now you'll have your money coming to you. If all that's done after the 45-day window, then they go through who filed their claims, how much money is actually going, how many fighters are being divided amongst. For every fighter that doesn't file their claim, the amount of money has to be divided amongst them as well. And then, so probably around July or August, you should get your check from the settlement. And then we'll finally be done with the Lee class settlement.
Okay, just to reiterate, for those fighters that don't make a claim, their money goes back into the pot and is divided amongst the rest of the fighters, correct?
Exactly. Doesn't go to the attorneys, doesn't go back to the UFC. It goes to the other fighters. And I should note, as we've noted before, at the hearing, the UFC's attorneys stress that the UFC wants you to put in your claim, wants you to get your money. There's no benefit to them for you not taking your claim.
None whatsoever. Especially for you retired guys that are struggling, you should really, really, really get in on this. Okay, is there anything else that we should know about this settlement before we move on?
No, except that I am sure someone there gave me COVID, so I'm now furious at the settlement process.
That
so
would
it's terrible.
Probably be it, because that's the only place that you've really gone, or the airport from when you came back.
Yeah, I mean I went through 1 million people traveling to Vegas and back, so it could be anybody. But you also got to think that all the fighters that were there, that fighters probably are not the most pro-vax type. So some of them might have been walking around emitting stuff left and right. So who knows?
I think it was more on the plane, because you are in a closed environment. It's a lot easier to get it that way than it is actually out in the open.
Maybe, but usually planes are pretty filtered there, and that's, it's harder to get on a plane. But who knows? I'm just
Filtered
gonna blame
air,
someone.
but what about everything you're touching?
That's possible. I have no clue. All I know is I got it. I tested positive, and I don't feel well. So that's all
I
there is
blame
to
it on people on a plane.
Exactly.
All right. So last week, Ari Emanuel gave an interview to Pat McAfee, and he made some very, very cryptic comments about the Ali Act, something to the effect of who even knows what's going to happen with the Ali Act going forward. Now, first of all, I need to note something that I haven't seen Ari Emanuel give an interview in quite some time, so I haven't seen him on video. But in this one, he's wearing a short sleeve shirt, and I could not help but notice that the last time I saw Ari, he did not look bricked up. But apparently Dana White's fitness regimen or whatever is spreading amongst the billionaires over there, because now Ari looks quite bricked up. So I had to just put that out there as a personal observation. But my question is, what is the Ali Act specifically, and what does it do?
Well, it should be noted that he just suggested, he said two things. One, the Ali Act has hurt boxing. That's what he said. And two, that we'll see what's going to happen to it. And Dana White's got some work to do if he enters boxing. It's implied that they might do some of the Ali Act, but we can't really enter panic mode yet because there's nothing saying that they're actually going to go after the Ali Act, right? We don't know for sure. It's something they're thinking about. But I wouldn't be surprised, because I've heard for a long time that they have put serious thoughts into how to neuter the Ali Act and stuff, because they've always been concerned it might be applied to the UFC. So I'm sure they have lots of thoughts, many more thoughts about it than other promoters do in boxing. So what the Ali Act is, it's a bill that was passed in 2000, signed, and it protects. There's the Professional Boxing Safety Act that came out in '96 that was for the physical health and monitoring boxers, and then there's an amendment to it, the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, which was much more about their financial protection than it was their physical protection. And that act did several things. It had a disclosure rule where the promoter had to disclose the compensation they got from a bout before they collected it. They had to show the fighter how much they got off that bout before they collected it. They put a firewall between managers and promoters, because that was a major problem in boxing, among people operating as both. It had some protections against compensation from promoters towards sanctioning organizations. It added rules about objective ratings. So it had a long list of things that it did. Another major one, very big, was ban was called coercive contracts. Put a limit on them. So if you were declared a mandatory, the promoter that promoted the fighter that was the champion, he could not demand options or additional a contract with you to fight his fighter. The mandatory meant you had a chance to fight him with no contractual strings attached. And if a promoter wanted you to fight someone under contract with him, he couldn't demand what's called a coercive contract, a contract that was over 1 year in length. That's the maximum he can ask for. As you know, in MMA, you have to sign long-term exclusive contracts to even get a shot fighting. So that's what the Ali Act is. And there's been a lot of complaints and stuff about it, but the key thing is it started as truthfully, it's an anti-monopoly bill as much as anything else. And that's where, you can start, piecing together the breadcrumbs here, Ari, the little hints, why they may perhaps want to get rid of the Ali Act.
Okay, couple of questions there. When did this come into play?
Well, the bill was signed in 2000, so it came into effect in 2000, and then you can go through the congressional hearings. They had it in the 90s, and actually there's several decades of congressional hearings. But it's been the powers that be, the law under which boxing has operated for the last 20-some years.
Okay, second question. You mentioned coercive contracts being a big part of why this happened. Would that be because of Don King?
I mean, it's almost exclusively about Don King. This bill, Don King was not a major promoter after the passage of this bill.
Right.
It targeted Bob Arum a little bit and other promotions, but it really went to the heart of Don King's business practices.
Okay. All right. Second question. Does the Ali Act actually work or not? Because the complaint is always that it's never enforced. So, first question is, does it work? And second question, are there loopholes that can be exploited?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of complaints about it because it's not enforced the way it was originally envisioned to be enforced. There's the attorney general doesn't bring charges against anybody ever. The athletic commissions don't use it. The only time you ever see it come up is basically by right of private action, where the boxer or his management or representation file a lawsuit that has an Ollie Act charge in there. That's the only time you see it used ever, and often those cases never go too far. One reason might be because on certain provision of the Ollie Act, it's very clear, and the promoter knows, promoter or manager, whoever's been accused of Ollie Act violations, that this is not worth going forward because I obviously violated the Ollie Act and I'll lose. So let's settle it. Let's release you, whatever. So I would argue that it hasn't been enforced. It hasn't worked nearly as well as it's supposed to, specifically the sanctioning organization rules about ratings. But where you can see it has had a huge impact is the behavior that promoters had before the Ollie Act have basically disappeared. Coercive contracts is not a problem anymore. You're not demanding options from mandatories. Very few fighters are having to hand over tons of fights to get a fight through the coercive contract provision. So that's basically ended on that side. You also see a few incidences where a promoter has hinted that he's going to issue his own titles. The BBC of New York did that. And then there was a letter written to the attorney general that'd be a violation. Technically, we don't know if that would be a violation of the Ollie Act. I've spoken to just a bunch of people in the industry about the Ollie Act. I've spoken to Lou DiBello. I've spoken to Stephen Espinoza, Rob Macy, Sam Spira, Leon Margolis, people at Top Rank and PBC, just Pat English, just you go down the line, Kurt Emhoff, all these people that have dealt with the Ollie Act. And they all have different opinions what it covers. But we don't know the full people have not challenged certain aspects of it, so we don't know the full powers of the Ollie Act. But it does look like, at least it's scary enough that people rescind having their own titles whenever that's brought up. So it does look like it prevents, under the provision that a promoter cannot compensate a sanctioning organization, that prevents a promoter from having his own titles. We don't officially know that's true, but it does seem like it's interpreted that way. So there's many things the Ollie Act hasn't done, hasn't been enforced enough. The disclosure rules are a lot weaker than they expected. But one thing it has done is we have not seen someone until now. Now, this is a big question, what we're seeing with the Saudis. No one has come in and monopolized the sport like we saw in the past. And it seems to have had the effect they wanted, which is to prevent that type of promoter taking over the champions and the weight classes.
Is it easier for the Saudis because they're outside of the purview of it? I'm just curious if it only applies in America or does it apply outside? I'm confused on that part.
Well, it technically applies any fight that takes place in America, any promotion that's in America. But if you have events outside the United States with non-Americans, there's no reach for the bill, right? It has no reach upon them. So it's not applied at all upon those situations. So yes, Saudis being overseas, that takes a lot of protections away because you're no longer dealing with the American courts. You're no longer dealing with under American legal system. Someone in the Twitter, Dan Brown, although he takes all the vowels out, so I don't know how you pronounce his name. He brought up a situation where someone was demanding options in a real case, I think it was WBC title, and I think this is the Chris Algieri situation, but I'm not sure where the promoter demanded that to get a title shot, he had to give him up 3 fights. Well, technically 3 fights is a 1-year extension. That's the limits of the Ollie Act. Now, is that an unenforceable contract? A lot of people I spoke to thought that would have been an unenforceable contract the way it was done, but no one challenged them, so we don't know for sure. So again, there's a lot of gray areas there. But when you fight overseas under a different venue, especially if you're a foreign fighter, you're forfeiting any of the protections of the Ollie Act. So yeah, the Saudis have a huge advantage in this situation.
What if you're not a foreign fighter? What if you're a domestic U.S. fighter, but you're fighting like on a Riyadh season card over there? How do the protections work then?
Well, I mean, you could probably, again, this is almost like, as I brought this up to someone, they said this is like a legal question from college, your class. We haven't seen it challenged that way, but it's possible that a lot of people think you could challenge in the United States because that's a violation of the Ali Act, and it's far reaching across all boxers. So if you're an American boxer who signed a contract and they're demanding that you do something that violates the Ali Act, you could go to court here in the U.S. And have it enforced. Now, if you're a non-American boxer and you sign a contract with the venue, there, of course, step back a second. We don't know how the courts would officially rule yet. That's how it's interpreted, but it's also very possible that the courts would rule, no, the venue is Saudi Arabia. You signed a contract that says you will be follow Saudi rules, Saudi courts, venue Saudi Arabia. There's nothing we can do. That's also a possibility. So again, there's a lot of things that haven't been decided yet because America has been the center of boxing for decades.
So basically, because there's no precedent set, we don't really know what the heck would happen.
Exactly. I mean, but the one thing it would do is if the Saudis wanted to do events in America, you would at least have a venue here when they come to America to say you're violating American law because you're holding events in America, and I'm let's say American boxer or a non-American but signed into a promotional agreement in America. You could point out that they're violating American law, and so you'd have more rights here than you would overseas.
Where does Mark Wayne Mullen fit in all that?
Nowhere.
Nowhere. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he submitted the boxing expansion acts. I mean, all the expansion acts for MMA, but that seems to be on the back burner. My understanding is that because he's now so closely into the Trump world, he will not be submitting that bill again.
Okay, that's why I asked, was because he seemed friendly at first.
Oh, at first he was very much, this was his kind of his baby. But I think he's decided that because Dana White and the UFC and is so tied to Trump world and he wants to be close to Trump world, this is not something he's going to be looking for because, let's be honest, Trump is closer to Dana White and Ari Emanuel than he is to Mark Wayne Mullen.
So if the UFC, Endeavor, TKO, what have you, were to actually target it, we wouldn't have a friendly in Mark Wayne Mullen.
Probably not. No, okay. I don't think anybody in the Republican side. The whole thing depends on what kind of leverage and machinations the UFC would do, or not the UFC, but TKO would do. And so there's many possibilities of how. I mean, it's very unlikely that they could get it passed, but there's also possible there's ways they probably could get it passed. So we will have to wait and see on that.
So why did, Mark Wayne Mullen aside, because he didn't have anything to do with when this act was put together, why did those loopholes, especially in the beginning, never actually get closed?
Well, they did. The GAO, General Accounting Office, and a congressional report was written after the Ali Act to kind of break down where it was falling short. And they listed all the areas it's falling short. It's not being enforced properly by the athletic commissions. There's not enough disclosure by them. We have these loopholes that the promoters and sanctioning organizations are getting around. So they listed all the problems. And the authors, John McCain and others came up with another bill that was supposed to fix it, the Professional Boxing Amendment Act. And for several years, they submitted it, which would be to close those loopholes and make the act the way they envisioned it work. And yet they could never get enough support to ever get it passed. And then by the time UFC took off, they started lobbying against it on the later versions of the bill. So because obviously they did not want this bill that could be passed that could easily include the UFC. They could write in the UFC as being this applying to the UFC as well. So that never got passed. So when people talk about the Ali Act, it doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work perfectly. It does some things. It's prevented some things. We got a lot more competition than we had before for boxers. But what it doesn't do, we offered a fix. And instead of passing that, everybody talks about just getting rid of the Ali Act.
Why would TKO want to get rid of it? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!